Grandpa Tom's gonna give you a real treat, sitting in his easy chair. And for all you good little girls and boys that really need a bedtime story, this is my writing. I am a writer, and being one that likes sayings, my book this is just one chapter of the book. I'm writing currently a series of books in this series, and it's called From the Mind of a Madman, which is fitting once you know me. The first book in this series is called, man, that ain't right. This chapter that I'm going to read you, I'll skip the introduction, but it's called, There Are No Winners in Gambling. We've heard that. We've heard people say that. And we all know it's true, except the gamblers. They don't want to believe it. They keep taking it in the ass from the casinos, you know. They'll come home and tell you, oh, they won $1,000, but they ain't going to tell you how many hundreds of thousands of dollars they've shit-canned and gave to the casinos, right? Okay. But anyway, there are no winners in gambling. And this is just one story here. This story takes place in New York, in Manhattan Island, and with a friend of mine, Vinny. His name was Vinny, an Italian friend of mine that lives there. And Vinny worked as a bartender at a hotel. There's where I met him. And he also worked for his brother at the stadium, the football stadium. He sold beer. He was a beer vendor. And on this day, which was a Sunday, it was a playoff game, Vinny worked, and he's on his way to work. Okay? And Vinny took the subway to the stadium that Sunday morning in November, and actually did arrive a little early. He managed to get there before 12:45, which turned out to be the right thing to do. He checked in with Mario, his brother, and helped him set up the concession. Some of the other vendors that sell beer for Mario had already arrived early. This allowed Vinny time to get his tray loaded and be on his way out into his assigned section in the stands. By 1:15, he was on the floor, and he had already sold out his first tray of ice-cold Budweiser. He was absolutely right. This was going to be one hell of a day. By the time he had returned with his second tray of beer, the box section and the stand seats were already about half full of anxious fans. Vinny had worked his way over to the box seats that were located just above the 45-yard line. There he was greeted by two diehard Jet fans that he had become friends with over the years. Over the past 6 years of working this section, these two gentlemen had never missed a home game. These two fans were Father Murphy and Father O'Brien. They were both parish priests in the New York area. These two priests have had these 4 box section seats for the past 12 years. Every home game, without fail, these guys were there, and always accompanied by a couple of chubby 10-year-old altar boys. The boys were always different with each game, but always on the chubby side. Okay, you might want to get some popcorn for this. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Vinny swears this part of the story is true. And factually accurate, to the best of his recollection. The 3 years prior to this playoff game, Vinny had managed to get these two priests loaded. At one of the early preseason games that year, after the game had ended and most of the fans were in a mad stampede for the exits in the stadium, Vinny had time to spend with these two Padres, laughing and telling jokes. When the companionship and the conversation seemed friendly enough, Vinny had to ask this question: what's with all the chubby altar boys? Father Murphy was seated in the outside seat next to the stairs that Vinny was perched on, leaning his head closer to Vinny's ear as if to whisper a closely guarded secret. You know, my son, since you asked, we're all friends, I'll tell you. This answer was coming out of the Padre in the form of a language commonly used by a lot of Irish Catholics. It's called the slur of drunken stupor. Vinny, being a bartender most of his adult life, had very little trouble interpreting what the Padre was saying. The conversation continued. Last year, the Vatican held a formal inquiry into this problem. 50,000 priests were surveyed from around the world. The results were not all that shocking when the survey was tallied and a common denominator was established. The Vatican released this secret report to its parishes. The general consensus of this report basically states 7 out of 10 priests agree and prefer chubby altar boys. This report states the following reasons for their preferences. Number 1, the chubby ones can take a much harder pounding. Number 2, you experience much less screaming and sobbing with the chubby ones. I cracked myself up. And number 3, the chubby ones appear to experience much less rib cracking when the Padre gets a running and start at Junior's backside. All in all, the chubby little love slaves are much more expandable anally. The skinny ones always want at least $20, whereas the chubsters are tickled to death with an ice cream cone and a boogie bar. Needless to say, Vinny was shocked out of his freaking skull when he heard this crap coming out of the good Padre's mouth. He actually couldn't believe what he was hearing. Vinny, being a devout Catholic all of his life, was in complete cranial meltdown. How in the hell are you supposed to wrap your lobes around that shit? After the drunken incident 3 years earlier, Vinny felt the need to withdraw on some of his open friendliness towards these 2 pillars of the community. Vinny, being a person who truly cares about his fellow man, decided it best at that point to just keep the relationship strictly on a business basis. A few months later that same year, Vinny was talking to the 2 priests after another home game. Vinny, you remember a few months ago when Father Murphy told you the story about the Vatican and the chubby altar boys? Well, we have to level with you. It was a total load of crap. Father Murphy and I had a wager on you. He bet you would never talk to us again. I bet that knowing the type of person you are, you would still talk to us. You would find a way to deal with it and continue being the friendly, caring person that we've always known. So needless to say, I proudly collect my $100 from Father Murphy. He wanted you to know that we were just jerking your chain. Sorry, my boy. This confession from these 2 jokers did a lot to restore his faith in humanity. Although Vinny felt like he'd been punked, basically, he was okay, but being the blunt end of this wager, with his crazy sense of humor, he really appreciated the effort that went into the setup for this bet. Now, if he could only get the fish hook out of his lips. Vinny really should have seen this coming. Zoom, right over his head. Then a double barrel roll and straight in the gonads. As Vinny was telling me part of this story, while laughing his ass off, I remember the comment I made to him. Dude, you fell so hard for that one, and you should really get some knee pads so you can kneel for the next one. Being priest had never stopped these 2 Padres from representing the human race. Like everyone, they have their fair share of vices. These 2 guys were very competitive with each other, not only in their personal lives, but also in their respective parishes. These 2 priests would bet on anything, even whose bingo game made the most money that week. Gambling and booze were their 2 main vices and passions in life. I can't help but wonder if the chubby altar boys don't fall into that same category too. Back at the playoff game, Vinny threw out a big smile and a warm greeting to the 2 fathers as he climbed a few steps and arrived at the box seats. He could tell these 2 Padres were looking very thirsty. Now came the same old corny joke that he knew was at the head of this transaction. Vinny, my boy, give us 4 beers, 1 for each hand. Then, like all the times before, for the past 6 years, Vinny had to force a smile and a fake laugh. Yuck, yuck, yuck. These guys still think that's some funny shit. Father O'Brien was seated in the outside seat for this game. After Vinny had finished the money transaction for the Brewskis, Father O'Brien looked up at Vinny and said, "Who's going to win the game today?" Vinny thought for a moment, replied, "I'd have to take the Patriots for this one." Father Murphy had elected to take the Jets. I, on the other hand, will be placing my pesos on the Patriots. Being a playoff game, we only have $200 riding on this game. Vinny, before you get here with the beer, Father Murphy and I had been looking around the stands. We were hoping to find something else we could make a wager on. Within a matter of a few moments, we both yelled, "Bingo!" at the same time. My boy, we would like you to very discreetly turn around slowly and look directly behind you and behind us. Go up about 10 rows. You can clearly see a dummy-looking blonde, or dumpy-looking blonde, sitting there with the companion. They both agreed has no wagering value. Without a doubt, her companion is a butch lesbian. Here's where the bet comes to play. Father Murphy bet me $100 that the dumpy blonde is actually a transvestite made up to look like a mime. I took the bet. I say the scraggy looking blonde is actually a female with a cheap $2 wig and of course made up to look like a mime. And the beauty of this wager, we also have a second bet for $100. Father Murphy bets the dumpy blonde is wearing that cheesy short skirt with his or her legs open to show off a nasty pair of granny panties, black granny panties. I say she's got her legs cocked open to show off a massive amount of pubic hair. At this distance, I can clearly see a definite texture to the dark area. It can't be panties. So I'm going with pubic hair, lots and lots of dark pubes. Vinny, Father Murphy, and myself have discussed this bet. We have decided that you would be the perfect judge for this wager. We both trust your judgment, and we place this wager in your capable hands. We both agree your final decision determines the outcome of this bet. So, my boy, here's what we'll do. We'll both kick in $20 for your service. We would like you to very discreetly approach the couple. Take a good look at them. Check under the bimbo skirt and determine who's the winner of this bet. For $40, you're damn right. You guys just bought yourself an altar boy. I'd be glad to judge this wager for you. Vinny did a 180, leaned over, picked up his beer tray. Without hesitation, he started tackling the stairs, weaving his way in and around arriving fans. Within the matter of a few moments, he found himself standing one step below the couple in question. As Vinny had achieved his first face-to-face glance at the blonde, he was the unwilling participant of this wager. Two things suddenly occurred to him. One, he hasn't seen that much packed powder since the last time he skied Aspen Mountain. Secondly, he thought he could possibly be snowblind for the rest of his life. Vinny managed to regain his thoughts long enough to jerk his head out of his ass and asked the couple, "Would you like a beer?" The answer to that question was yes, we'd love one. As the beer exchange was concluded, the butch companion with the blonde handed Vinny $20 bill and said, "Keep the change." As the bill was exchanging hands, Vinny accidentally on purpose dropped the 20. Vinny leaned over and once again set his beer tray on the step, then slowly bent over to pick up the money. While at the same time, hoping he could be discreet enough to sneak a peek under the skirt of the blonde, Vinny wasn't even close to being slick. This babe had his number right from the start. Vinny had that sixth sense feeling he was busted. Too late to turn back now. He was already committed. Much to his surprise, as his face turned even more to the right for that little extra treat, The blonde, instead of closing her legs, actually spread them about 2 inches further apart. Vinny, on his way back up, was grinning from ear to ear. He looked directly into the blonde's eyes and said, "Thank you for the tip, I appreciate it." The blonde responded, "No problem, thank you." Even as Vinny collected his beer tray and turned to walk back down the stairs, the blonde and her companion were both grinning like shit-eating possums. That had to be the easiest $50 he had ever earned. 40 from the Padres and a 10 spot from the couple. Not to mention the nasty-ass beaver shot that was just in his face moments earlier. As Vinny was telling me this part of the story, he couldn't hold back the smile, which is exposing what appeared to be a recently decent set of canine teeth. That's right, that boy's a pure dog. As he was working his way back down the stairs, once again weaving his way through the arriving fans traffic, it was virtually impossible for him to keep from spilling his beer. His whole inner being was screaming for full-out laughter. He couldn't give in to his sudden urge. If he did, there goes almost a tray of beer he'd have to pay for. Vinny's arms had started shaking while descending the stairs. This was caused by the uncontrolled containment of laughter. As he reached the railing next to where Father O'Brien was seated, he wasted no time setting the beer tray and himself down on the steps. Within a matter of a split second, Vinny had his face buried in his hands and laughing his ass off for what seemed like 10 minutes. Eventually, he regained his composure enough to speak to the priest, who had been waiting patiently for Vinny's decision as to who would be the winner of this wager. Vinny looked at both priests with tears still coming out of his eyes. "I have bad news for you guys. Concerning the first bet, Padres, I'm sorry, you're both wrong. That blonde wasn't a transvestite with a cheap wig and made up to look like a mime. She wasn't just a dumpy female with mime makeup. Padres, that was Tammy Faye Baker. And the Butch Lesbo, wrong again, that was her husband, Jim Baker." And the second bet, "Sorry fellas, you're both wrong again. Those weren't granny panties. And sorry to say, that wasn't a big patch of pubic hair. I am not real certain of the species, but I'm pretty damn sure that was fruit flies." That ends the chapter. At the end. And how is that for a bedtime story?